great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "Great minds are skeptical." This podcast, our goal is to become more skeptical and elevate our mind, at least even a little bit, by understanding philosophical skepticism. I can't wait to explore skepticism with you, but more importantly than the philosophy is the practical application that's going to allow you to think more clearly, more objectively, and more critically. Really, in all that we're even doing here, this is the goal. Take big, grand, sweeping movements and try to make sense of them, at least at the basic level, in short order, and hopefully every week leave you with something to ponder, to stew on, and elevate your mind as we march across the genre of wisdom literature from prehistory all the way to our current postmodern world we live. I'm Dr. David Hopkins, humanities professor, your host and guide. So glad to have you here with me today. If this is your first time listening in, I encourage you, check out the show notes. Click on the link to the free Substack page, subscribe, and you're going to get a few things. Number one, you're going to get notes about what we talk about. Number two, you're going to get instructions if you really want to next level your learning to the book Moral Wisdom, Past and Present, that I'm marching through. I'm reading myself, and we'll explore it together. You can read along, and you can use this podcast to supplement your understanding of every topic. I promise the chapters are really short, sweet, power-packed, usually not even more than 10, 12 pages a week. And then number three, I also give you supplementary free original source documents on every single topics that I personally vet for quality. I discuss so that when one of the subjects or the philosophers really tends to pique your interest, you can go deeper than just this podcast. And then number four, when you subscribe, you gain access to my personal email where you can ask me any questions you have on the content. I'll always do my best to respond to you and help you along your personal intellectual journey. But hey, if you just want to enjoy the podcast, that's all good too. I'm just glad to have you along as we need an educated, thinking, open-minded society to function. And Lord knows we need armies of critical thinking, wise people to counteract all the crazy that's going on around us. I mean, let's face it. I see, hear, and know some crazy every single day, and I'm sure you do too. So here we go. Skepticism. When I saw this was a topic today, I was skeptical. Yeah, pun was very much intended there. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I was a little bit overwhelmed on where I wanted to go with this one. Last week with Aristotle, I pretty much knew from the jump that I wanted to talk about happiness and Nicomachean ethics as I've been lecturing this topic in university classrooms for years and years. So that was kind of a no-brainer for me. But with skepticism, it's a bit of a daunting for a podcast and a lecture series like this because there are so many different levels. There's layers and versions of skepticism, from practical skepticism used in the business community or the scientific community to extreme theoretical and philosophical denial of, well, just about everything that exists. So it's a challenge. But I want to chart a course for us today at a mainstream practical level, a practical approach to skepticism that you can use today. And that's kind of the route that we're going to take. So, since in our studies of wisdom literature, we're still swimming through the waters of the classical Greece. Sure seems like we've been in Greece for a long time now, but as usual, we'll look at the key players in this skeptical movement. But I want to be careful as we talk about skepticism to not be just philosophical without being real, and to give you something to sink your teeth in. So hopefully I can thread the fine line of helping you, quote unquote, get skepticism from an academic perspective. But more importantly, really, is how can you in your life think skeptically to expand your thinking and make you a more well-rounded, intellectual, and powerful critical thinker, because skepticism has that ability. So, we pick up our story of skepticism during the era of Hellenistic Greece, and this is the time that corresponds roughly to around 356 BC, all the way 2nd century CE. We move into the Common Era there after the death of Christ. But and at this point, the Roman Empire, it came to dominate the ancient world with its military. But the Romans' intellectual culture, it basically came from the Greeks. And as we move through this early period, we'd been in classical Greece for quite some time as we looked at Socrates and we looked at Plato and we moved to Aristotle. But as we move through this early period after the birth and death of Christ, with Rome in full power, the Greeks still exerted a heavy influence over Roman culture. And philosophically, after the death of Plato and Aristotle, the focus of philosophical inquiry, it started to shift to something that is known as moral philosophy. And the philosophical shift reflects the social and the political changes that had nurtured a growing sense of individualism. But this budding new idea of putting the individual first left a lot of people very disconnected, discombobulated from their older belief systems, like their religion or the political structure. There was just a lot of uncertainty and a rising sense of moral dissatisfaction. Not a whole unlike our age that we're going through now. We got a lot of those same feelings that are everywhere today. But back then, a number of competing schools of philosophy, they sort of sprung up during this upheaval, and each of them was teaching a different way to live life. We had the Platonists, we had the Aristotelians, we had the Cynics, we had the Stoics, which we're going to be talking about in a couple weeks, by the way. We had the Epicureans, which are up next week. And of course, the Skeptics, which is our focus today. So as you can see, there was a whole lot of drama after the death of Alexander the Great. And we talked about that during our discussion on Aristotle. Remember, he was Alexander the Great's tutor. And when we consider this development of what we call moral philosophy, and skepticism, by the way, is a moral philosophy, the first aspect of this, the first characteristic, is a three-headed creature encompassing, number one, the personal side of life, the emotional side of life, and the psychological. And the central aim of this side of skepticism, and those who practiced any version of it during the Hellenistic period, was to achieve something that was known as ataraxia. I know that term ataraxia probably means nothing to you, so how would we define the term ataraxia? Well, you could say, in modern English, it means freedom from disturbance. Or you could say it means inner tranquility. And by using moral philosophy, the idea was, and skepticism's core tenet was, that it was possible, if you practice skepticism properly, to completely free your mind from the stress, the trouble, the desires, and the problems of society. That's pretty powerful right there, right? I think a lot of us would like to be free from the stress, the desires, and the problems of society. That was the one side of this philosophy. Now, I promise, I'm going to come back to this later a lot and answer the question, because a lot of you are probably thinking, yeah, right, that sounds great, but how is inner tranquility even possible? Being a skeptic, let alone anything else. But for the sake of coherence, let's talk about the flip side, the other side of the coin of skepticism, because there's also a practical side to skepticism that raised a wide variety of issues about the proper way to conduct yourself inside and outside of civil society. How should you act day to day, moment to moment? And so I'm sure your next question is, what does it mean to properly conduct ourselves inside and outside of a civil society? Well, in a civil society, the skeptic would tell you we must question our cultural values, our religious values, our political beliefs, or should I even go so far as to say challenge our political ideologies? See, during the Hellenistic period, both the moral philosophy and the practical application were developed side by side by philosophers. They went hand in hand. I mean, it did no good for anyone to sit around, eat grapes, and drink wine and wax philosophically if there wasn't a practical application in the ideas. So in Greece, the moral and the practical always appeared together at varying levels. You could swap them out. You needed one for the other. But for now, just know that the skeptics of the Greeks were not some one-trick pony where it was an all or none affair, like believe in one god or one monarch or one set of beliefs. These varying degrees and philosophies, maybe they went more practical or maybe they went more moral, but these two core components of skepticism, they blended, they merged, and they molded, but in some shape or form in the end, when you read about the philosophy of skepticism in the Greeks, and now we're not anywhere in the Middle Ages, we're not to some of the later skeptics that we're going to see when we get over into Europe later on, but in some shape or form, in the end, the components of number one, the moral philosophy approach, and focus on personal, emotional, psychological ideas to find peace, and then number two, the practical applications about how to live your life properly in a civil society. Those were the two sides of skepticism. Hopefully that all makes sense. It is at this point that the discussion gets a little bit more dicey, because I could approach this part of our conversation in two different ways, from the academic or the more practical approach. Now, I just feel it's necessary to go down the academic path for just a moment. As in our readings on moral ethics, I would not be doing skepticism justice to just skip over the historical and/or/ academic side of skepticism. So I want to introduce you to a guy. His name was Pyrrho, who I would say qualifies as one of the fathers of skepticism and the founder of Pyrrhonian school. But I want to bring up Pyrrho because the core readings on skepticism that I've been looking at this week, it's based on his philosophy. So the Pyrrhonian skepticism is the focus of our talk. But I will bring up a second academic branch too, which grew out of Platonism and came out of the Plato Academy. We already talked a lot about the Plato's Academy, but I think I want to invest more time and I want to analyze in more depth the Pyrrhonian skepticism, because that's newer and we've already talked so much about Plato's Academy and that sort of stuff. So let's look at Pyrrho. The man, Pyrrho, he's a fascinating figure. He was well-traveled. He lived from about 360 to 270 BCE. And like Socrates, he did a whole lot of teaching, but very, very little writing. As like Socrates, he didn't write anything down. Everything we know comes from students and other accounts of him. But obviously from the historical records, we do have that he was a incredibly charismatic and he inspired large following, and the stories behind him are very interesting. And the one I find maybe the most interesting, real briefly here, is how Pyrrho actually became a skeptic. So it seems, as I mentioned, he was quite a traveler, and so he's traveling the world. He learned what he needed to develop his ideas from an unnamed naked wise man while he was in India. And so, Must have been an interesting teaching environment, but hey, it obviously helped Pyrrho solidify his ideas, and he taught his version of skepticism really for most of his adult life. But the cornerstones of skepticism that he laid, they faded away after his death. Sort of like Alexander's charisma willed its way to an immense empire. But after he dies, it quickly crumbles. This seems in many ways to be the same for Pyrrhonian skepticism until it is revived by an individual, Anaximander, in the 1st century BCE, over probably close to 100 years roughly after Pyrrho's death. A philosophy rising, falling, and then being reborn with a new coat of paint. New ideas or outlooks, by the way, isn't new. I mean, we will see philosophies and theories that burst on the scene with great interest, fanfare, and expectation, only to die out and people lose interest for a time. And then it's reinvigorated for whatever reasons are going on in society, life, and individuals who re-engage with them. I'll give you one example that has been in the news right now. Critical race theory. Oh yeah, I said it. The dreaded CRT. This ideology or theory draws angst from both the left, mad that it isn't accepted full stop everywhere, and the right, mad that it's even considered to be taught anywhere. Well, CRT's history dates all the way back to the early 1900s when it was just known as critical theory. Then it pretty much died out, especially during World War II. Started really in Germany, and well, with Hitler in power, he didn't really have time for that sort of stuff. He was busy with other things, and so it made a brief appearance in the United States in the 60s, was pretty much dismissed again until the reiteration and revival in the 80s when it started to pick up fanfare, especially by professors in law schools at Stanford and Harvard and other quote-unquote Ivy League types kind of latched onto it. Now it's kind of morphed and evolved into a very hot-button contentious topic. You know, when it first reemerged heavy in the late 80s and 90s, we only really saw it at higher level graduate school, especially law school. Some of the key people who revived it came out of the law schools. And the primary focus seems to be very valid in many ways in American law, where the legal system was skewed and laws made and enacted and enforced differently in minority communities than elsewhere, or laws that seem to directly target low income primarily in minority communities, which in a sense gives a lot of credence to the idea of CRT. I mean, think about it. A lot of the drug laws, the drug enforcement, the criminalization, sorry about that, of some of these drugs and who they hit, who they targeted, and who they threw in jail. I mean, there's some validity there. But now we flash forward, and here we are today talking. Now we have our schools of education, sadly in many ways a disgrace to the idea of education, attempting to embed a very complex and a nuanced law school or grad school theory and make it relevant and mainstream it into K-12 schools, where obviously the content can't be as sophisticated for middle school or even high school students as graduate schools or law students. And so, of course, we get this dumbing down of a complex theory to some of its most contentious points, like all whites are bad and want to control all life, etc., etc. And I don't want to get into the swamp of this theory. I do that, though, by the way, if in episode number 71, if you're really interested in hearing me talk about critical race theory, I interviewed a critical race theorist, a pretty famous one, a well-known one on this particular podcast. It was a really fun conversation. And we found some things with Milagros Phillips that I agreed with. This individual has actually worked with Congress on CRT issues, but we also had a lot of areas we disagreed about. So anyway, if you want to hear me go deep into the weeds on CRT, check out that podcast, number 71, as I think I talked to her for about an hour and a half. But anyway, to get back on track, this theory dealing with primary legal issues gets morphed and changed, and all of a sudden we have different states turning it into a political firestorm to either ban or keep it. Of course, I'm not here to tell you what to think or what you should believe about critical race theory, as me telling you what to think would sort of bastardize the entire concept of the Intellectual Freedom Podcast. But what I want to get across is that it is not uncommon for us to see a philosophy or a theory be created, emerge, die, re-emerge in a little different form over and over again. So we could say the same thing happened with Pyrrhonian skepticism, which pretty much lost all its focus after Pyrrho died, and it was reborn. So what we're discussing mainly, what we know through the reborn version. Now, I think this second iteration is probably pretty similar to the original. It was about 100 years or so that it kind of got resurrected, and a lot of the documents started to get compiled and put together. But hey, that's my guess. But Anaximander brought it back to life in the 1st century. So this is what we know. The philosophical origins of ancient skepticism lie in epistemology, a big fancy word, epistemology. But don't be intimidated by this word if you don't know what it means. But really, all we're talking about when you hear the word epistemology is the study of knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge, the scope of knowledge, and the means of how we even get knowledge. So you learning something new and gaining knowledge is epistemology, okay? So it's big word, means something fancy, but really what ancient skepticism was about was how us human beings are able to acquire knowledge and understand things. The Greeks were always incredibly interested in the question, what is knowledge? How do we get it? Is knowledge definitive? Is it universal? And so the Greeks were just fascinated by this idea, and they wrote about it quite frequently. And the term itself, skeptic, comes from the Greek word skepsis, meaning investigation. So the skeptics then were investigating the question of whether we know, well, anything. Do we know anything? The primary tool that the skeptics used to discover if they did actually know anything was this intellectual weapon called doubt. Doubt. That's what they thought they could use to figure out if they know anything. Seems strange this could be a tool to learn, but this was what the skeptics believed, and it was a major innovation and constitutes their major contribution to philosophy. Just taking one step backwards again and remember Plato, remember even Aristotle, objective, rational, observable things. Heck, Aristotle had slaves just watching things to figure them out because he believed if you could observe them and watch them, you could learn and you could discover truth and fact and acquire knowledge. See, what the skeptics did is they took the idea that the path to knowledge was observable and said, you're full of BS, Aristotle and Plato. The true path to knowledge is to doubt things. And by doubting things, it forces you to dig deeper and deeper. Don't give me your observable facts, Aristotle, as those observable facts may not actually be real in my world or other people's world or other cultures' world. Doubt is the path to knowledge. It's here that we see a war waging behind this idea of acquiring knowledge. This idea that you could know something certainly, that you could know something beyond a shadow of a doubt. Because prior to this moment, the Greeks believed that the distinguishing feature of knowledge, which put it apart from just an opinion, is that you could verify something to be true. That rational and observable fact was actually a condition of knowing something. That a person cannot know something unless he or she is certain that it's true. And that what we know, someone else could also know it. And if you could know it in Greece, you could know it in Macedonia. If you could know it in Macedonia, you could know it in Egypt. It's something that's rational and observable, and it's true. The skeptics dropped a bomb on that idea. And they rejected the possibility that such a condition of certainty could ever be met. The skeptics believed neither perception or reason could provide a clear and perfect accounting. I mean, if we break it down simply, when we look at the philosophy of skepticism, it really is nothing more than this methodical action of questioning things, of doubting everything, and literally refusing to believe anything that somebody tells us about the known world, and just accepting that it's actually true, and that it's actually certain would be an egregious sin to the skeptic. And by the way, this could include moral values and principles, or politics, or religious dogma. Skeptics would say that neither science nor philosophy can provide any level of certainty in the pursuit of knowledge. And if you take away this idea that there actually is infallible 100% true things, what are we left with? Well, we're left with nothing more than an appearance. And everyone having their own opinion. This leaves the thinker in a pretty precarious position. I think you can kind of see that. So let's talk about skeptical investigation. The primary interest of the skeptics was with the subjective aspects of experience rather than the state of any external physical phenomena. They believed that peace should be the fundamental goal of human life. Nothing else mattered in the external world. It sort of makes sense, right? If you can't actually figure anything out definitively and be 100% right about anything, and you come to accept that idea as fact, well, it takes a whole lot of stress off the person. And in theory, a person could reach a state of mental peace because, well, you're not stressed out about getting everything right, because to the skeptic, you can't get it right. So you just as well stop trying. And if you stop trying, then your mind can be mentally at peace. So peace and fulfillment, or just letting go of all the unknown questions in life, is an important aim of the skeptic. And so the skeptic's principal concern was that, hey, you know what? This endless search for certainty in life, this hard road of endlessly searching for that 100% infallible truth and perfect reality, well, you know what? That just leaves everybody very unhappy or mad or frustrated. And so the right response, and in fact the only response in the face of all of these doubts, is that causes stress and anxiety and happiness, is to recognize that there is no perfect solution. There is no infallible truth. 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4. And in the end, for a skeptic, the best thing that you can do is to stop troubling your mind over the matter at all. So that goal of Pyrrho and skepticism, which was seen by its practitioners, by the way, as a therapeutic practice, almost a medical means of achieving things rather than a philosophical position, the goal, find tranquility. One of the most important figures writing on this topic was Sextus Empiricus, a Pyrrhonian skeptic that saw the skeptic almost like a physician. And what he did is he administered doubt to cure all the ills that flow from our mistaken appearances. We get all bent out of shape, angry, frustrated, and anxious because we think we have the truth or we can find the truth, but we can't seem to ever get home. I know if that seems almost too crazy, too far out there, so pessimistic, and you would not be alone, as many during the time of Pyrrho and Sextus thought the same thing. The major criticism of the time was that skepticism reduced us basically to inaction on everything, because really skepticism at the extreme is so pessimistic, it can lead to this idea, well, since there is no truth, there's no objective reality, why even try at anything? Because none of it really matters in the end anyway, because I'm never going to figure anything out that has any true meaning. I mean, really. What are you and I just going to do? Are we just going to curl up in the fetal position and never leave our rooms? Because my goodness, you can never do anything definitively. And anything that you do, in fact, is never going to be certainly right. And I mean, it literally could reduce you to such a point of inaction that you can't live your life. And so Pyrrho ends up advising people to do this. Accept appearance, whether they consist of our perceptions of the customs in which they live. But the skeptic still needed to reject any dogmatism or any commitment to firm knowledge. And the moral standard that emerges here is usefulness. Usefulness. I want to say that again. So Pyrrho advised people, look, we all got to live in society. So there's certain appearances that we just kind of have to go along with in the flow of daily life so that we can, make money so we can feed our family, have a roof over our head, and just survive in society. And that's fine, but don't you dare accept any dogmas or any firm knowledge. So the idea, rather than complete rejection, becomes usefulness. So the skeptics rejected the theoretical wisdom. The theoretical wisdom is just some mental construct. So all these philosophers that had these theoretical truths, forget about it. Not true. They're completely unreliable to be bought and accepted because theoretical wisdom is simply not available to humans and our limited brain capacities. Now, let me read you just a couple of very short passages. One from the Outline of Skepticism by Sextus Empiricus, and he lived more than likely around the 2nd or maybe the 3rd century CE, when he said this, quote, "Skepticism opposes appearances to judgments, with the result that, owing to the equal weight of the opposing appearances, we are brought firstly to a state of mental suspense, and next to a state of unperturbedness or quietude," he continues on. "The originating cause of skepticism is, we say, the hope of attaining quietude. The main basic principle of the skeptic's system is that of opposing to every proposition an equal proposition, for we believe that as a consequence of this, we end by ceasing to dogmatize." Sextus continues on. "The skeptic is mainly concerned with ethics, being based on the rules of conduct, habits, laws, legendary beliefs, and dogmatic conception. In each of these, we oppose now to itself and now to each of the others. We adopt the phrase, 'I suspend judgment,' in place of, 'I am unable to say which of the objects presented I ought to believe and which I ought to disbelieve.' indicating that the objects appear to us as equal as regards credibility or incredibility. The term suspension is used because the mind is thus suspended, so that it neither affirms nor denies anything. End quote. So, if we take Pyrrhonian skepticism and all the iterations, and we see more in newer versions of skepticism later in history as we march through the Renaissance to the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, to modern times and relativism, we'll get there again. I guess at this point we can say there are three manifestations. Number one, common sense skepticism. This is a natural and it's a healthy form of skepticism that really most of us employ or deploy on a daily basis. This would be the opposite of someone who is gullible or naive, or the other extreme, arrogant, or even an ideological extremist. You could say someone who fails to use common sense has a childlike naivete and to believe whatever someone says, or maybe they're so extreme, so self-confident, so, how shall I say, pig-headed, when they hear something against their position, that they cannot deploy skepticism at all. It could either be I can't or I won't mindset when it comes to skepticism. So common sense skepticism is number one. Number two, philosophical skepticism. The view that we know much less than we think we do, or we know nothing at all. To the philosopher, especially the Greek era, humility was a time-honored and highly desired characteristic for the wise. I mean, really, how many of us, honestly, are humble enough, wise enough, calm enough to actually sit, listen, and consider an idea or an opinion that doesn't jive with our current belief system for very long? I think the number is very limited. Philosophical skepticism focuses on having humility versus pride. Number three, absolute skepticism. This is the most extreme type of skepticism. The one where I'm not sure it has a whole lot of functional value if you want to live, interact, and be a part of a culture and a society at all. I mean, in the extreme world, nothing is real. Everything is unknown, and nobody anywhere has the right to impose any sorts of limits, as nothing is known. Everything is a question. Reality is beyond our grasp. I mean, for me, in my life, and probably in yours too, I don't want to live in this world. It just isn't a practical, functional way to exist for me. Could some people find solace or peace in isolation, or in such an extreme state of not caring or worrying about anything because they can't figure it out, that they can thrive in this world? Well, absolute skeptics would say this, but from my perception, I have to throw out the extreme as I don't find it livable. I mean, it's a fun thing to play around with theoretically, but not practical for me, and my guess is not practical for hardly anybody. So, in the end, how can we be skeptics and improve our lives, elevate our minds, become better thinkers and better human beings in general? I mean, really, isn't this the overarching question in all of our in all of our discussions? I mean, so what's the point? Question is vital for us here. Okay, the skeptics, I believe, have left us 6 things, or I've kind of jotted down 6 practical. Yes, they're very, very practical characteristics to be a wise, hard-nosed, critical thinker without lapsing into cynicism, where you can't believe anything, or some extreme skeptic that can't function in society. So here are the characteristics. Number 1, have a questioning mind. So the questioning mind's all about having the attitude of an individual that is curious and interested. A person with a questioning mind has an attitude about continually asking questions, not to be nosy or just to bother people, but to ask questions for further clarification. Because a person with a questioning mind demands reasons and justification or proof of any and all assertions, even when somebody makes an assertion they generally agree with. Yeah, I'm talking to you, hardcore political junkies, who not just lean left or lean right, but fall 100% in a political camp. You need to not just question everything that the other party says, but you also need to question everything your own party says without defending or justifying something on a snap judgment because they're on, quote unquote, your team. The real goal of a questioning mind is to get enough information and evidence before, let me repeat that, before you make judgments about somebody, something, or politics, or whatever the case might be. Number 2, a skeptical mind will suspend judgment. So the suspension of judgment is a dimension of thinking, of professional skepticism, where you're going to just postpone making that final conclusion or that judgment until evidence has been gathered that explains the actual cause of some problem that you run into. The Greek skeptics were unwilling to simply base to accept a base assertion in some claim quickly. I guess you could say they were open-minded in evaluating evidence. I know I'm not real good at this. I'm quick to form and make snap judgments. It isn't an easy thing to do to step back and evaluate all angles rather than just run with whatever your mind comes up with on first thought. I think about this especially in the world of politics. And again, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or far left or far right, in between. Literally, none of that means anything to me. I hope you arrive at your conclusions by suspending your judgment and questioning the status quo, because too often the far left and the far right followers will accept no matter what an assertion that's made by their party. They don't want to admit they were wrong ever. Do you know someone like that? Or sometimes we refuse to open our minds in politics and show some humility because we don't want to give any ammunition to the other side. We often hear this with the, yeah, my side may have got caught doing X, but remember, when the other side, they're way worse. Remember when they got caught doing Y? So that means that my side's better than your side, even though my side just got caught doing something. I mean, that's the thing. A lot of times we won't suspend any judgment because we've just flat out hardened our minds that no other option is available. And we're just going to defend it. And many are perfectly okay going down with this ship no matter what, even though they might be wrong. Politicians in the Democrat and Republican Party love this kind of follower. And they literally can, the follower where they can literally do no wrong and still get your vote. This is a big problem. And you simply cannot be a critical thinker with this mindset. When you're in this realm, we need to recognize that it doesn't mean you need to abandon your party when something wrong happens. But it does mean that when something happens in politics, especially, we can't just dig in our heels, bury our head in the sand, and fight for something or someone that isn't right because we're on that team, because that's exactly what these politicians are banking on us doing. That's exactly where they want us to live, and that's exactly why we're in this horrific division that we're in right now. Yeah, of course the media plays a part. Yeah, of course these politicians are just loud and obnoxious and annoying, and they cause division all the time. But they get away with it because you and I and society in general, we just won't hold their feet to the fire. And they get away with it. And they know they can get away with it. When we can't suspend our judgment, we get oversimplified responses to everything. The world's very nuanced. The world's very complicated. Every issue has multifacets to it. But do you notice how often our politicians try and narrow it down to one thing? Yeah, that's because we're not skeptical enough in society and we accept stuff. But anyway, the third characteristic is searching for knowledge. Third characteristic of a skeptic, searching for knowledge. And another trait, if you want to be a professional skeptic, you have to be curious enough to search for knowledge. Like listening to this podcast. Most of you're not professional philosophers. I mean, I'm not a professional philosopher. I'm a humanities professor. I love philosophy and I love wisdom literature, but you have to have a natural curiosity to investigate things that you don't know anything about or you want to know more, because that purpose of the investigation is to acquire more information and more knowledge. And the more you know, the more you study, the more you expose to, the more you read, the more of the greater minds you read, you reduce the uncertainties. Skeptics are constantly searching for new knowledge or knowledge to contradict their own belief system. Doing this, I can tell you guys, is so powerful, and I challenge you to push yourself in this area. That's why I always say, listen to the podcast, but hey, join the Substack page. Go ahead and read deeper and deeper. Go beyond anything I talk about in one of these podcasts. It'll add knowledge and understanding. And heck, you could read more and more and get so deep into the woods and say, wow, that guy's crazy. He didn't even know what he was saying there. I found out this little tidbit of knowledge, and this is where I see where this is going. I totally disagree with what he's saying there. But again, search for knowledge, search for knowledge, search for knowledge. It's just so important. Don't be that guy that when you ask them questions about anything and the answer is, I don't know. I never thought about that. What are you even talking about? Don't be that person. Push yourself. Don't zombie walk through life. That is not a skeptic. Skeptic's going to question things and learn along the way. Number 4. Skeptics possess interpersonal understanding. Now, this one's an interesting one. So interpersonal understanding is basically referring to the reasons or motivations of you and your interactions with society. They're you as an individual that drive, what are the things that drive your behavior and impact your relationships, your career, your social circle. This was an extremely hard one. Do you have the mental toughness to question and evaluate impartially who you are, what you do, and how you interact with the world? And can you do it honestly? If you can do this, you begin to understand your motivations and even your personal integrity. Looking at yourself almost from a disconnected third-party perspective can literally change your life. But see, so many people get stuck in a rut. They can't even question themselves. They can't question their behavior. They make excuses for themselves. That's not good. Study after study, poll after poll right now show that so many Americans and so many people just feel stuck in a rut. And it leads to stress and anxiety and anger and all these horrible emotions. But so much of that, if we would just stop, have a little skepticism towards ourselves and look deeper into our own motivations and our own behavior and what drives us to do the things that we do. And why do we keep doing things over and over again that are not good for ourselves or are preventing us from doing other things? And what's triggering that? And then we can get to the root causes and what we got to do to overcome that. Now, that interpersonal deep dive of skeptically looking at ourselves and into our actions is extremely powerful. Number 5, self-determination. So self-determining trait is kind of the ability to decide on the adequacy of the information presented as evidence before we're making judgments. If you're highly self-determining, you rely less and less on hyperbole, on marketing, on strong opinions, and you're not swayed by, oh, you know the type of person, where the loudest person thinks they win just because they're annoyingly loud. The skeptic isn't easily influenced by culture, and they don't get bum rushed into decisions. They don't get swept away into the bandwagon just because everybody else is doing something. Skeptical people that are self-determining, they will, no matter what, undertake whatever amount of additional investigations are needed, and they'll patiently, that word patiently, search for evidence until they're personally satisfied and confident in their own decision. Knowing their thought process was clear at the end of the day. This doesn't mean that you completely ignore all the opinions and take the road of, I'm just going to figure this whole thing out by myself. No. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about is, sure, you'll hear the opinions, you'll investigate the ideas and the concepts from others. But at the end of the day, it's all going to be validated and checked and questioned and analyzed at the best that you can do it. Number 6. I got to do one here for you. Self-confidence and humility. I've already talked a bit about humility, and I'm sure it's no coincidence that in the genre of wisdom literature that we're marching through, humility comes up again and again and again across cultures, religions, great minds, great speakers, from Muhammad to Jesus to Buddha to pretty much every great mind. We'll get to Einstein. I mean, they just talk about humility all the time. But the skeptic must have a degree of humility, or they can't question everything. And they also need self-confidence or self-worth and the belief in their own ability, because if you possess that trait, self-confidence, when it's time to question things, and you're more confident in a world where you don't know the right answer, so you're not afraid to take on tasks or analysis that might scare them, it might make you change your mind. But see, self-confidence runs side by side with humility, because yes, you need to have confidence in yourself and your abilities to question and analyze. And that even though things can be a struggle, that you can figure them out, that's confidence, or problems in these situations in life. But you have to have the humility to know that probably your first snap judgment isn't right. And probably you may never actually figure out the final perfect solution. And that's okay. So humility is so important to the skeptic. Because at the end of the day, we form our judgments. We make our best case choices, right? Both you and I, we go through our day. We're presented with situations and problems and people and with whatever the case might be. And we don't have perfect information. And we probably never will have perfect information. And we get confronted with stuff. And life happens and we feel overwhelmed. And that's okay, because if you have self-confidence coupled with humility, you can figure things out better. We just have to avoid the extremes. Because self-confidence, if it gets too extreme, becomes pride. And pride can become arrogance. And then all of a sudden you become that jerk that is never wrong. If that arrogance gets too high, you can't make quality decisions. On the flip side, humility is very important and demonstrates being a strong person, that you can say, say, hey, I don't have all the right answers here. But if you take it too far to the extreme and you're so humble and you feel like, oh, I'm never going to get anything figured out, then you can get stuck in that utter despair and inaction. And we talked about those extreme skeptics. Inaction is not necessarily good. So in the end, I think skepticism may be one of the most vital philosophies. And I don't mean silly, crazy skepticism. I don't mean that I want to live in a world where if someone calls himself a 6-year-old baby girl and they're a 55-year-old man, that I want to suspend my belief and treat them like a 6-year-old girl. I don't mean that. Well, then maybe that's okay with you, and that's your choice too. I'm talking about being able to make decisions in life based on thinking and questioning and not accepting what's put in front of you at face value. We have way too many people in our society today that are blindly accepting what those in power want us to believe. Our education system, our media is maybe the least skeptical than they have ever been in our history. On the liberal media, they will not do anything to challenge the Democratic Party at any significant level. The conservative media will not do anything to challenge the Republican level at any significant level. This is dangerous. And the funny thing in all this, just got to bring this up. The funny thing is, a liberal will literally mock Fox News that they're a sham, silly news source, the same way a conservative will mock CNN. I mean, come on, this is so sad. We are flirting with the destruction of an enlightened society, which our democracy is founded, because we simply have lost the ability to think, to debate, to engage, and yes, skeptically, using proper techniques we have discussed, analyze the world rigorously and honestly. There are many factors in our own self-destruction. I mean, I can speculate. Probably through our march through our wisdom literature, we'll hit on pretty much all of them. But the reality is things have fallen a long way. And somehow, some way, somewhere along the line, we've abandoned basic principles of integrity and, yes, critical thinking. I'm sure part of the problem is our schools. Part of it's our social media landscape. Part of it's just horrific ideological driven politicians that are putting party way above the people. But maybe what we need is enough people to become skeptics. We need to become skeptics because until we get enough people honestly questioning and challenging those in power, instead of meagerly putting up a little squawk here and there and then just saying, well, I don't have any other choice, and I guess I'm going to fall in line with this politician or that political party or that policy, because those with the power, well, it's never going to change. Change is required. And I think the skeptic philosophy that was laid out by the Greeks, well, I think we need a whole lot more of that. And a whole lot less of this cultural, ideological divide in politics and social media, driven by just sheep-like following and grudging acceptance and complaining about things. In politics, if you are a Democrat and you want to send a message to the party, or if you are a Republican and want to send a message to the party, vote anyone in but the party demagogue. In media, turn off the obnoxious TV host or TV show. Unfollow people. Don't use a platform. Disconnect from it. That hits the offender where it counts. The only way to get a political party to listen to people is if you vote them out. Heck, vote Green Party, Libertarian Party, the New Forward Party, or an independent. Don't give the party the vote. That is all they want. That is all they need to keep power. Deprive them of it. Then maybe, just maybe, they will stop. Nothing else will work. See, we as a people We have to drive out the poisonous cancer that's infesting culture and politics. And the only way to do it is to not give these political parties and media figures or media platform the air to breathe. Wow. Okay. I think that's probably enough skepticism for one day, right? It has a real practical approach. And I hope now you have a firm foundation of skepticism. Or at least you have a bit of a deeper appreciation of it. If this topic really intrigues you, I invite you to get on that Substack page, read some of those resources. The link in the show notes is provided, and those resources are outstanding. Heck, join me, read along with me as we go from wisdom literature topic to wisdom literature topic, and then we'll go through it all together. We're not in any rush to get through any one topic, and I've enjoyed the study because it's slow, it's methodical, and I'm here trying to gain knowledge, clarify my own perceptions, and hopefully grow a little bit wiser along the journey with you. But you know, when I reflect on skepticism, it's powerful. I mean, at the extreme, the denial that anything is real. Well, I mean, that's fun to think about. There's not a whole lot of practical value there, but the practical skepticism we discussed, I hope what you see is how you can apply skills and techniques to build some skeptical muscle in your decision. Implementing some of these skills in your life now, that's what it's all about. So I hope again you took something practical from our talk today. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and we will talk again in the next episode. Take care.